Hello, and welcome in. Today, we're talking about something a little different, something that I think should resonate with a lot of people when it comes to talking about what Bitcoin actually is in its soul, I guess to say. So, this is not about price, it's not about what MicroStrategy is doing. It overshadows everything when you're talking about what Bitcoin is and what it's going to be in the future. So, let's get into it. There is a new proposal, a Bitcoin improvement proposal called BIP-110. I'm sure you've heard about it. You've seen it going all around. And if you care about what Bitcoin actually is, not the price, not the institutional adoption, not the financial products being built around it, what it actually is on its core or what it will be in the future, then this is important because this is not just a technical debate. This is a fight about who gets to decide what Bitcoin actually is when it comes to the consensus mechanism around Bitcoin. And the answer to that question, I think, will have long lasting effects on what Bitcoin is and what it continues to be in the future. What is a BIP and the history behind it? BIP stands for Bitcoin Improvement Proposal. It's how changes to the Bitcoin's protocol get proposed and debated. Anyone can write one, but not everyone gets taken seriously. This is part of how consensus works. The BIP process has been responsible for some of Bitcoin's most important changes and updates. And understanding that history matters for understanding why this BIP-110, is different. I'm going to go over a few examples for you. So BIP-32, proposed in 2012, introduced hierarchical deterministic wallets. That was a lot to say. The technology that lets a single seed phrase generate all your Bitcoin addresses. That's in your hardware wallet right now, and it's really useful. Another one, BIP-141, the SegWit, one that was really important. This was activated in August of 2017 after one of the most contentious governance battles in Bitcoin's history. It separated transaction signatures from transaction data, increasing effective block capacity, not size, and critically, it made the Lightning Network possible, and that's a huge one. Without SegWit, there'd be no Lightning. It took years of debate before it was activated. BIP 340, 341, and 342, collectively known as Taproot, another super important one, activated in November of 2021. Taproot improved privacy, made complex transactions look identical to simple ones, and enabled more sophisticated scripting. It had 90% miner support before its activation, 4 years of careful development, broad consensus, which means over 90% of the people agreed in that one there. Here's what those successful upgrades have in common. They added capability. They improved efficiency. They had overwhelming support across miners, developers, and node operators before it went live. This BIP-110 is a different story altogether because it tackles a different aspect of what Bitcoin is. Let's get into it. What is BIP-110? It was authored by someone going by the pseudonym of Datham Oham. I think I said that right. Would restrict certain types of data from being embedded in Bitcoin transactions. Specifically, it targets ordinals, inscriptions, BRC20 tokens, runes, and large data payloads. It caps the op return outputs at 83 bytes, restricts data pushes to 256 bytes, and it disables certain Taproot scripting features. The stated goal is to clean up the block space, reduce blockchain bloat, reinforce Bitcoin's monetary purpose. They want to make it like money again. And then, crucially, it expires automatically after 1 year. No permanent change, just a pause while the community figures out a long-term solution. That sounds good for now, and that does sound okay, right? They're going to say, hey, let's put this on pause while we figure something out. But in a little bit, we're going to find out what the real issue is there. Sounds reasonable on the surface, and here is where it gets complicated. The case for it. The case for implementing BIP-110. The supporters of BIP-110 have a real argument, and it's worth taking seriously. I do agree with the sentiment behind it. When ordinals exploded in 2023 and 2024, it created genuine problems. Transaction fees spiked. Regular people trying to send Bitcoin were competing for block space with people paying to inscribe JPEG images onto the blockchain permanently. Here's how that actually works. Inscriptions don't directly make your transactions more expensive. What they do is compete for the block space. Bitcoin blocks have a limited capacity. When that capacity fills up with inscription data, there's less room for regular payment transactions. When demand exceeds supply, fees go up for everyone. That's the free market working as designed. But it means inscriptions indirectly raise cost for regular users during high activity periods. Beyond fees, node operators saw storage requirements increase. Every full node stores the entire blockchain. Now they have to store a little more. If blocks filled up with image data permanently, the blockchain grows faster and bigger. And eventually, running a full node requires more than a regular hard drive. That concentrates verification power in the hands of large operators, the people who have the capacity to run bigger nodes, and undermines decentralization. These are real problems. The people supporting BIP-110, they're not crazy. Bitcoin Knots, for example, a node software that filters inscription transactions by default, has seen its share of growth to about 22% of people running Knots on their nodes. And that's not nothing. These are real issues. When you think about it, of course, we want the Bitcoin blocks to be filled with legitimate transactions, people who are taking money and sending it to other people, instead of having JPEGs and stuff. Here's the case against BIP-110, and this is my argument as well. First, there is no long-term plan. The author of BIP-110 himself has said, in his own words, that BIP-110 is not intended to be an ideal solution, only good enough and simple enough to buy a long-term solution to this inscription data that's ending up on these blocks. So here's my biggest issue. The proposal says, let's change consensus rules for a year to pause ordinals while we figure out what to do about ordinals. And what's the plan after a year? There isn't one. They're asking Bitcoin to change its fundamental rules based on a problem that doesn't even have an agreed solution. That is a really big ask. That's not a plan. That's a delayed dress up as a fix. Second, it probably doesn't even work. Critics have already demonstrated that images can still be embedded in Bitcoin transactions that are fully compliant with BIP-110. And I just saw something on X about this yesterday. One developer posted an image to the network under BIP-110 constraints just to prove the point. And I love that this person did that. The restrictions are a game of whack-a-mole. Block the current method and people find another. It's just the way it's going to work. The data doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. Think about that. Third, and this is the most important part, you have to really think about what Bitcoin is here. The precedent is everything. And this is the argument I keep coming back to, and I want to build it out properly because I think it's one of the most important points in this entire debate. Bitcoin's entire value proposition rests on one thing. The rules don't change because of what a few or powerful people want. And we have to think about what that really means when it comes to Bitcoin. It means that no government can decide to inflate the supply. It means that no corporation can decide to change the transaction rules. It also means that no developer, however smart, however well-intentioned, can unilaterally alter the consensus that every participant in the network has agreed to. The immutability is not a feature. It is the feature. It is why Bitcoin is worth anything at all as a store of value. People hold Bitcoin through 50% drawdowns, through government bans, through exchange collapses, because they believe the rules will not change. That belief is the foundation. The moment you change the consensus network rules because a group of people decide they don't like how other group of people are using the network, you have introduced something new into the system. Not a technical change, a governance change. You have established that rules can change when the right people apply enough pressure. And if they were to do this, the argument next time will be, well, we did it before and everything else was fine. It was temporary, it expired, no harm done. And that argument is exactly the problem, because the next proposal won't be about JPEGs. It could be about which addresses are allowed to transact, or something even worse, which jurisdictions can participate, which types of transactions meet some future definition of legitimate use, and so on and so on. I'm not saying BIP-110 supporters want any of that. I'm saying the precedent doesn't care about intent. The precedent doesn't care about intent. Precedents are used by the next person who comes along with a different agenda. Bitcoin has survived for 16 years because it's resistant to exactly this kind of pressure. Remember the block size wars? They tried to change the rules. The community held the line. Bitcoin Cash split off and became just a footnote in something that's no longer really existent. And Bitcoin kept going. Number 4, think about what Bitcoin actually is. And here's a thought that I don't think gets enough debate in the space. The very first block, which is the Genesis block, contained embedded data. Satoshi inscribed the newspaper headline directly into it. Chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks. We've all seen it. We all know it. This is non-monetary data, embedded deliberately as a statement about why Bitcoin exists. So the very person or people who created Bitcoin used the blockchain to embed meaning beyond just a transaction on day one by design. And here's another angle worth considering. By 2140, the block rewards goes to zero entirely. At that point, miners are compensated solely through transaction fees alone. Every single transaction, including inscriptions and ordinals, contributes to miner revenue. Ordinals and Ruins ecosystems have already contributed over $500 million in transaction fees to Bitcoin's security budget. While critics say that ordinals don't belong on Bitcoin, and I agree with that, I don't think that any embedded data should be there other than transactions. But as I was saying on my point before, by the year 2140, a few JPEGs might keep these miners economically incentivized. And it might not be a bug, it might be a feature. Number 5, who decides? Bitcoin is open source software. Anyone in the world can use it. A person in Nigeria sending remittances home, a new protocol, an artist who wants to put something permanent on the most secure ledger in the world, a corporation holding it as a treasury asset. Bitcoin doesn't ask why you're using it. It processes valid transaction, paying valid fees, and that's it. A small group of developers and node operators who get to decide if some uses are legitimate or not, and encoding that judgment into the consensus changes what Bitcoin fundamentally is, not price, what it is. Here's a few things to consider. BIP-110 has a mandatory signaling window scheduled for around August 7th of 2026. On that date, nodes running BIP-110 software will begin rejecting blocks that doesn't signal support, even if the overwhelming majority of miners haven't agreed to it. Right now, it's only about 0.31% of mining hash rates that are signaling support for BIP-110. That's 5 exahashes out of 940 on the entire network. The number has been dropping, and some days it's almost zero. Adam Back, who Satoshi cited in the Bitcoin white paper, called this BIP-110 an intentional literal downgrade, and I agree with him. James Lopp, who we all know, called the activation parameters reckless and the chain split a real risk. These are not Bitcoin critics. These are people who have given decades to this network. If August arrives with minimal miner support and a small group of nodes begin rejecting valid blocks, two chains emerge. Two competing versions of Bitcoin, both claiming to be the real one, and we've seen this before, and it's not clean. It's not nice. Here's where I want to finish on this. I understand the frustration with ordinals. I hold some of that frustration in myself. Bitcoin block space is precious, and using it for tokens and low-effort JPEGs feels wasteful. Personally, I don't think people should be allowed to add any sort of embedded data other than transaction data in these blocks. That's my personal belief. When I saw ordinals coming out, I was like, this is ridiculous. But I hold a stronger belief here. Bitcoin rules should not change because of a group of people, however well-intentioned, if they decide they don't like how other people are using the network, especially without a clear long-term solution, and especially with 0.31 miner support as of right now, and more importantly, with no broad consensus. The answer to ordinals is not change the consensus rules. It's let the free market work. If inscription activity genuinely displaces payment activities, the fees will reflect that. Users will make choices. Miners will follow the fees. The market will sort it out slowly, messily, but without breaking the most important rule about Bitcoin. The rules should not change. Before I end, please let me know below what you think about this. Basically, what I've been trying to say in this video is, yes, I agree that ordinals and inscriptions and all that stuff is just garbage, should not belong on the Bitcoin blockchain itself. But my other argument is that because Bitcoin is open source, free to use, no barrier to entry, people are allowed to use it for what they want to use it for. I personally believe that people should use like the base layer as long-term savings, layer 2 is like Lightning for spending, and never actually have to feel like they need to put a JPEG on there. But on the other hand, if there's something important that happens at Bitcoin, why not put that on the blockchain as the same as Satoshi did when he put that newspaper clipping in there? It's so tough to tackle these angles, but I'm hoping that everybody just comes back to like first principles of Bitcoin, where it's for everybody and anybody is allowed to use it for what they want, and not just a small group of people being like, we want it to be this, so everybody has to change the rules. That's a very important part. And the consensus part of Bitcoin is sort of the heart of it. We all should decide what happens with Bitcoin, not a small majority that starts to implement these things. And now they're possibly talking about excluding certain UTXOs after August. And these things have many implications. And we've been through this again and again and again. And what always happens is Bitcoin's core, its main philosophies, its consensus network, its decentralization, its security, all the important things about Bitcoin always seems to win. Like if you think about Bitcoin Cash, they forked off, they were going to be this big, amazing thing. And they're in the gutter now, and Bitcoin is still thriving. I mean, look at the institutional adoption, all that amazing stuff. Let me know what you think below. Drop a comment. What is your thoughts on BIP-110? I have left you mine. Let me know if you agree or disagree. I'm open to debate, or if you want to know any more information. And remember, if you're going to buy Bitcoin, make sure you send it to cold storage. Peace out.